When I first moved into Lakeside Grove, I thought it was the kind of peaceful community where people waved from their porches and borrowed sugar from their neighbors. The kind of place where everyone minded their own business. But I was wrong. Because in every neighborhood, there's always that one person who thinks they run the show. Ours was a woman named Karen. Everyone called her HOA Karen, the self-appointed ruler of the homeowners association. She knew every rule, every regulation, and every way to make your life miserable if you didn't follow them. At first, I tried to keep things friendly. I smiled, I waved, I even went along with some of her ridiculous requests like repainting my fence, just because she didn't like the shade of beige. But it didn't take long for her to cross the line. It started with nasty notes on my door, complaints to the HOA board about the color of my mailbox, and one day, she even accused me of lowering property values because I parked my truck too close to the curb. I thought she couldn't get any worse, until the day she decided to come after my boat. That boat wasn't just any boat, it was my late father's pride and joy. Every summer, we take it out on the lake at sunrise, just the two of us. It meant more to me than anything else I own. But to Karen, it was nothing more than an eyesore. She said it violated HOA storage rules and claimed it ruined the neighborhood aesthetic. I explained that it was temporary, that I was repairing the engine before winter storage. But she didn't care. She said if I didn't move it, she'd take care of it herself. I didn't think she'd actually do it. But a week later, when I came home from work, my driveway was empty, the boat was gone. No note, no warning, just gone. My chest tightened, my hands shook, and for a moment, I couldn't believe it. She'd actually done it. She'd stolen my father's boat right off my property. But here's the thing about Karen, she never realized that I knew exactly what she was planning. And that old boat, it wasn't quite what it seemed. I had made a few adjustments. Let's just say, by the time Karen tried to make her little power move, she walked straight into a trap she'd never forget. And that's when the real fun began. The night before it all went down, I already had a feeling Karen was planning something. She'd been circling the block more often, walking her little white dog while pretending not to look at my driveway. But I could see her eyes darting toward the boat every single time. She even took pictures one after another like she was collecting evidence for her next HOA complaint. I knew she wouldn't stop until she got her way. So I decided to stop playing nice. That weekend, I spent hours working on the boat, but not in the way Karen thought. I set up a small GPS tracker inside the cabin, wired a hidden camera under the dashboard, and even placed a discrete motion sensor in the trailer's frame. I wasn't planning revenge, not yet, but I wanted proof. Proof that Karen was crossing the line again. I made sure everything looked normal from the outside, like an old man tinkering with his boat, trying to bring it back to life. I even made sure to accidentally leave the cover half off, knowing she wouldn't be able to resist meddling. By the next morning, the trap was set. And just as I suspected, she took the bait. While I was at work, my neighbor Tom, the only decent guy on our street, texted me saying he saw Karen talking to a tow truck driver. They were parked near my driveway, pointing at my boat. Tom thought I'd given them permission, but when I told him I hadn't, his voice dropped. "Man, she's really doing it," he said. "She's actually taking it." By the time I got home, the driveway was empty, just tire marks on the pavement where my boat used to be. The air felt thick and still, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. I went straight inside and checked the live camera feed. What I saw made my blood run cold. Karen, standing proudly beside my boat, giving orders like she was some kind of commander. She even had the nerve to pose for a photo in front of it. But I didn't call the cops. Not yet. Because part of me wanted to see how far she'd go. I wanted to know what she'd do once she realized she'd just stolen something that wasn't exactly what it looked like. The tracker showed the boat being towed to the HOA storage lot, tucked behind the community clubhouse, a place only board members like her had keys to. That night, I parked across the street from the clubhouse and waited, watching the dim lights glow through the fog. Somewhere behind those gates, Karen thought she'd won, but she had no idea she'd just stepped into her own mess, one that was only beginning to unravel. The next morning, drove past the community clubhouse like nothing had happened. Karen was there, of course, standing near the parking lot with her clipboard, barking orders at the landscapers. She looked proud, like someone who had finally proven her point. I slowed down just enough for her to notice me. Our eyes met for a brief second, and she smiled. That smug, self-satisfied smile told me everything I needed to know. She thought she'd won, but behind that smile saw something else, a flicker of uncertainty. Maybe she'd already realized that something wasn't quite right, because by that time, The tracker had already started sending back strange readings. The coordinates were moving, even though the boat was supposed to be locked inside the storage lot. I pulled over near the edge of the lake, checked the feed on my phone, and froze. The boat wasn't there anymore. Somehow, it was gone again. That's when Tom called. "Hey," he said, lowering his voice. "You didn't hear this from me, but Karen had some guys come early this morning. They moved the boat out, said it was going to be disposed of properly." His words hung in the air. Disposed of properly. She'd really lost it. But I wasn't angry anymore, not in the same way. It was something colder. I told Tom not to worry and hung up. Then I checked the camera feed again. The hidden camera I'd installed inside the cabin was still live, streaming faint, jerky footage. Through the cracked lens, I could make out part of a warehouse, dim light flickering overhead, and Karen's voice echoing faintly in the background. She was talking to someone, probably a storage manager, about getting rid of it quietly. Every word made my pulse tighten. This wasn't just an HOA complaint anymore, this was personal. She wanted control, power, to make an example out of me. But what she didn't realize was that every word, every move, every order was being recorded. And soon, the entire neighborhood would see the truth behind their so-called HOA queen. Still, there was something odd about the footage. Behind Karen, I caught sight of something. A figure moving in the shadows. Not one of the workers. Someone else was there, watching. The motion sensor blinked, detecting movement close to the boat. Then the feed cut off. Static filled the screen. For the first time, I felt a hint of unease. Maybe I'd underestimated just how deep this whole thing went. Maybe Karen wasn't the only one playing a game here. And as night fell again, the quiet streets of Lakeside Grove didn't feel so peaceful anymore. By the next evening, the entire neighborhood was whispering something about a situation at the clubhouse. I didn't have to ask what it was, I already knew. Whatever Karen had done with that boat, it wasn't going according to her plan. I could feel it. Still, I kept quiet, pretending to go about my usual routine. I mowed the lawn, waved at neighbors, and acted like nothing was wrong. But inside, I was waiting for the right moment. That night, I parked near the clubhouse again. The place looked deserted except for a faint glow inside the storage lot. The tall chain link fence cast long shadows across the pavement. I turned off the engine and waited, watching. Then, around midnight, a pair of headlights flickered on from behind the gates. A black SUV. It rolled out slowly, and for a second, I saw her Karen sitting in the passenger seat, talking fast, waving her hands like she was nervous. I pulled my cap lower and watched the SUV turn toward the old maintenance road leading to the lake. I followed from a distance, keeping my headlights off. The road was quiet, winding through the trees, until it opened up near the docks. That's when I saw the outline of my boat, half covered with a tarp, sitting at the edge of the water. Two men were standing near it, talking in low voices. Karen stood beside them, arms crossed, her expression tight and anxious. Whatever she'd planned, she wanted it done tonight. I stayed hidden behind a tree, recording everything. The wind carried bits of their conversation, something about getting rid of the problem and no one finding out. Karen's voice cracked when she said, "Just push it in. It's junk anyway." My chest tightened. I could hear the scrape of the trailer as they began to move it closer to the water. And then, suddenly, one of the men stopped. "Hey, what's that blinking light?" he asked. Karen turned sharply, confused. I could see the small red glow of the motion sensor flashing under the tarp. "It's fine," she snapped, trying to sound calm, but her voice trembled. "Just keep going." They didn't get far. The ground gave a loud metallic click, the kind of sound that makes your stomach drop. The men froze. Karen spun around, looking wildly at the boat. A second later, a bright flash burst from under the tarp, not an explosion, but a blinding flare. The hidden alarm system I'd wired had just been triggered. The scene erupted in chaos, running lights flashing across the dark water. Karen stumbled back, screaming for them to stop. But it was too late. The trap had been sprung, and every secret she thought she'd buried was about to come crashing into the open. The flare lit up the entire lakeside like daylight. Karen stumbled backward, shielding her face as the two men tried to run. But within seconds, motion-activated spotlights from the nearby dock burst on, triggered by the alarm system I'd installed days earlier. Everything was visible: the boat, the men, and Karen caught right in the middle of it all. I stayed hidden in the shadows, recording every second. My heart was pounding, but not from fear, from disbelief. It was working exactly as planned. But then, something unexpected happened. As the light from the flare began to fade, a second figure stepped out from behind the SUV. It wasn't one of the workers. It was Richard, Karen's husband. I hadn't seen him much around the neighborhood. People said he usually kept to himself, tired of his wife's constant battles with the HOA. But there he was, his face pale, his voice sharp. "Karen, what did you do?" he shouted. She froze, like a kid caught red-handed. "Richard, it's not what it looks like," she yelled back, but her voice was shaking. He pointed toward the boat. "You told me this was about neighborhood safety, not stealing someone's property." The men looked at each other, realizing they were part of something much bigger than they signed up for. They dropped the ropes and backed away. I watched, stunned, as the argument spiraled. Karen tried to explain, twisting the story to make herself look like the victim, but Richard wasn't buying it. He stormed toward the boat, and for a second, I thought he was going to untie it until his foot hit something metal. The motion sensor blinked again. The alarm shrieked, and he jumped back, startled. Then, almost like a cue, my phone buzzed. The camera feed came alive. The video was streaming straight to the neighborhood's online HOA group, every word, every image broadcasting live for everyone to see. Karen's eyes widened in horror as she realized what was happening. She turned toward the dark street, scanning wildly for whoever was behind it. Her voice cracked, shouting into the night, "Who's doing this?" But she already knew. Then came the second twist, something I hadn't planned. The boat started to shift on its trailer, slowly rolling forward toward the edge of the dock. The brake must have slipped in the chaos. Karen screamed as Richard tried to stop it, but the wheels kept moving. The front dipped over the edge, and with a loud splash, the boat slid halfway into the water, taking the camera feed with it. The screen on my phone went dark. For a moment, there was only silence, just the rippling water and the sound of distant sirens growing closer. Whatever game Karen thought she was playing, it had just turned into something far more serious. The wail of sirens grew louder until the flashing red and blue lights lit up the entire lakeside. Karen stood frozen near the dock, her hands shaking, her face pale under the harsh glare. The two men she'd hired had already taken off running down the trail, leaving her and Richard standing alone beside the half-submerged boat. I stepped out from behind the trees, finally making my presence known. The look on Karen's face when she saw me, that mix of guilt and shock, was something I'll never forget. "Evening, Karen," I said calmly, walking closer. "Looks like you found yourself in a bit of trouble," she stammered, trying to find words, but nothing came out. Richard looked from her to me, realization dawning on his face. "You set this up," he said quietly. "You knew she'd take it." I nodded. "I didn't want this to happen, but she left me no choice. I just wanted her to stop." The police arrived moments later, flashlights cutting through the fog. They asked who owned the property, who moved the boat, and whether anyone had permission to touch it. Karen tried to twist the story, claiming she was protecting neighborhood standards, but the officers already had the video. Every second had been auto-uploaded to cloud storage when the live stream began. One officer's radio crackled with a dispatch note confirming it. "We've got the footage," he said. "She's on camera giving the order." Karen's confidence crumbled right there on the dock. Her voice cracked as she tried to explain herself, but the more she spoke, the worse it sounded. Richard just stood there, staring out at the lake, shaking his head. For years, he'd watched her control everyone, and now, in one night, it had all come apart. As they led her toward the patrol car, I turned back toward the water. The boat was still half floating, rocking gently with the waves. I waded in a little, gripping the rope and pulling it back toward shore. The reflection of the flashing lights shimmered across the surface, and for a moment, I thought about my dad, how proud he'd be that I'd stood up for myself without stooping to revenge. But just as I turned to leave, I noticed something odd. Wedged between the seats inside the cabin was a small waterproof case one I didn't remember putting there. I reached in, opened it, and froze. Inside were printed letters, HOA documents, signed forms, and notes that detailed every secret meeting Karen had ever manipulated. It wasn't just about my boat. She'd been covering up something far bigger. As the last police car drove away, I looked down at the papers in my hands. Maybe, just maybe, this story wasn't over yet. I stood by the water for a long time, the cool night air brushing against my face as the last patrol car disappeared down the road. The lake was quiet again, except for the soft sound of waves lapping against the dock. In my hands were the papers from the case, proof that Karen had been manipulating HOA records for years. There were fake signatures, altered fines, even evidence that she'd used HOA funds for personal projects. It was all right there, written in her own handwriting. The next morning, I brought everything to the HOA board. For the first time in years, they actually listened. The board president, A man named Martin, who'd always been a little too scared to challenge her, stared at the documents in disbelief. "I can't believe this," he said quietly. "She's been running this place like her own kingdom." Within days, an emergency meeting was called. Karen was officially removed from her position and banned from handling any neighborhood affairs. Word spread fast by the weekend. Everyone in Lakeside Grove knew what she'd done. Richard came by a few days later to apologize. He looked tired, older somehow. "I should have stopped her," he said, staring down at the ground. "She got too caught up in controlling everyone. It stopped being about the neighborhood a long time ago." I nodded. "Sometimes power does that to people," I said. "The important thing is that it's over now." He gave a faint smile and left quietly, moving out of the neighborhood a week later. The HOA replaced Karen with a new committee that focused on community instead of control. For the first time since I'd moved in, Lakeside Grove actually felt peaceful. Neighbors started waving again, sharing coffee on porches, helping each other fix things instead of reporting them. Even Tom dropped by one morning to joke that maybe I should run for HOA president. I laughed and told him one experience with that mess was enough. As for my boat, I had it repaired and repainted, this time with a fresh coat of deep blue. It sat by the dock again, shining under the sun, ready for the next trip out on the water. Every now and then, when the lake was calm, I'd take it out just like my dad used to. Looking back, I realized it was never really about the boat. It was about standing up for myself, about reminding people that doing what's right doesn't always mean fighting back hard. Sometimes it just means being patient, smart, and knowing when to let the truth do the work for you. And as I watched the sunset that evening, the reflection of the water glowing orange and gold, I couldn't help but smile. Lakeside Grove finally felt like home again.